Give her a countdown.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Trinkatella, and we're going to be talking about nutrition for kids, tips on getting children to eat healthier. And this is me. I'm Dr. Trinkatella. I've been a naturopathic doctor for 20 years. I am a clinical educator and consultant. I practice at Sunrise Functional Medicine, and I'm also part of Integrative Medicine Academy. All right, so here's our overview for today. We're going to go over some general guidelines, caloric needs of kids, macronutrients, the need for fiber, what to look out for with sugar, how to deal with picky eaters, addressing food allergies and sensitivities. We'll go over some basic tips for meals and some basic supplementation for kids. All right, so in general, the place that we want to start with food is quality is key. So fresh is always best. You want to try to minimize packaged and processed foods. So I often tell people to shop the perimeter of the grocery store. If you're shopping in a regular grocery store, usually all of the whole foods are on the perimeter. You have your meats, you have your dairy, you have your vegetables, you have your fruit. And the good things that you can find down the aisles are usually the fats and oils and nuts and seeds and other grains. So when you think about shopping, try to visualize wherever it is you shop and do the majority of your shopping on the perimeter of the grocery store. If you can, choose organic over conventional. I know for some people this seems like a lot in terms of expense, but I think it is getting better. And most conventional grocery stores do have an organic section. And you just want to think about the lifetime accumulation of some of these pesticides and herbicides that are on our food, and choose organic whenever possible. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about organic later and where you can get some guidelines through Environmental Working Group on which foods to choose organic. You want to avoid preservatives, additives, and flavor enhancers. Those are the things that look like chemicals on the label. They could either be preservatives or additives to enhance flavor, things like MSG, lots of excess salt. You want to look for those kinds of things. If you don't recognize it as a food, you want to really figure out what it is. It could be a nutrient, but oftentimes they are chemicals to add as a preservative or an additive. You want to read the labels, check the sugar content and the overall ingredients. The order in which things are listed on a food label, it goes from the greatest to the least. So whatever's listed number one, that is there in the greatest quantity. So if sugar is in the first three, probably not a good food to get because it's going to be higher in sugar. You want to eat the rainbow, and I'm not talking about Skittles. I know that is their slogan, but I'm talking about eating a broad variety of fruits and vegetables that are in a different color range, from green to purple to red to orange. The broader variety you have, the more nutrients you're getting, not only in micronutrients, but phytonutrients as well. You want to try new foods and recipes often. So, you know, once or twice a week when you're planning to go shopping, try to maybe incorporate a new recipe that you would like to try. Sometimes they work out, they're really great, and they become a part of your basic recipes or your staples that you go to often. Other times you may just try it once and say, it was okay, but I'd like to try something else. But keep trying new things so you don't get bored. And so that your kids don't get bored. You want to try and shop in a variety of places. You know, there's specialty food stores, natural food stores, spice shops, farmers markets, big box stores like Costco. You can get a number of good things at Costco for cheap, and regular grocery stores. There's always something good that you can find. You just have to adhere to the guidelines of reading those labels and avoiding foods with preservatives. Plan and prepare. I think this is the part where a lot of people fall down, in that they don't plan and prepare before they go grocery shopping, and you end up buying a lot of things more on an impulse buy. But if you plan before you go, if you plan your meals, and it doesn't have to be every single meal. Most of us eat kind of the same foods for breakfast. We may have leftovers for lunch. You know, lunch can be pretty simple. It can be a salad and some leftovers from the night before. So what you're really planning for are your evening meals. And I often encourage people to make more dinner, make extra dinner so that you have some food left over for lunch the next day. I encourage people to make a large salad that you don't put dressing on, that you can put in a sealed container, and you can have that as part of your lunch the next day. And it can be, combine it with other leftovers from the night before, or add some chicken and nuts and other things to a salad to make it more like a meal. For kids, you can do some leftover things. If it was soup or something that you can readily heat up for them, then it makes life a little bit easier and keeps you away from grabbing some of the quick foods and fast foods. It's good to go around and determine what you already have and what you need. So you want to build your shopping list from there. And this sounds like real basic stuff, but for some people, if they don't have it really organized when they're planning, it all seems overwhelming. So I actually have a shopping list that I created as a Word document, and it pretty much lists all of the staples that I have in my house. And so I can use it as a shopping list and a checklist. So before I go to the grocery store, it prompts me to look and check and see if I need to replenish any of those staples, things that I commonly use to build a good meal. And before I go grocery shopping, I try to determine what dinners I'm going to make sure I have all of the ingredients for that. And so when I go shopping, I'm pretty much well organized, and I've listed out the meals that I'm going to make for the week. So instead of having to, in the moment, on a Wednesday night when I'm stressed and the kids are coming home and we're like, oh my God, what are we going to make for dinner? I've already thought it out, and I just refer back to my shopping list and say, oh, I was going to make this week. So, you know, this takes 30 minutes. That's all I have right now. So I'm going to make this meal. So you want to keep ingredients on hand for quick and healthy meals that can be prepared in 30 minutes. So whatever that is for you as a family, I don't tend to meal plan for people because I don't know what their preferences are. I just try to give general guidelines and some foundational principles about how to choose good foods, and you have to take that information and go from there. Start where you are. I often tell people to follow the 80-20 rule. So eat really well 80% of the time and allow for some dietary flexibility 20% of the time. For some people, they like to be more rigid. 90% of the time, they eat really well, and they're more flexible 10% of the time. So whatever works for you. And you don't want to just calculate your supposed good and bad foods in the course of a day. You want to really think about the entire week, especially with your kids. Sometimes they don't get enough vegetables in a single day, but you want to look at that over the span of an entire week and determine whether or not it's fairly balanced. You want to know that improving your diet is a constantly evolving process, and improving your kids' diet is a constantly evolving process. Think long-term change over going on a diet, which implies a temporary change. So, you know, for parents and with kids, when you're trying new things and you're trying to introduce new foods to your family, this has to be an ongoing process. This has to be the norm of your family, so that it's not something you just do for a week or two and then abandon the whole process and go back to eating pizza and hamburgers because they're easy. So meals are a family event. You want to involve the kids in meal planning, prep, and cooking if they're old enough to participate. There's usually always something that they can do. So if you get them involved in the kitchen, you take a little time, maybe they are snapping some green beans, or they are chopping something if they can work with a small knife. You know, it's according to their age or ability. You also want to see if they'll pick a recipe that they might like to help with, something that everybody could eat for dinner, and let them help with the grocery shopping. I used to, when I'd have to go grocery shopping, if my kids were with me and they were old enough, I'd send them on missions to find items in the grocery store. Now, we would do a bulk of our shopping at Trader Joe's, which is a fairly small grocery store, so it was easy to keep track of them, and they kind of knew where everything was. but I'd have to send them on missions to find very specific items. So it kept them engaged and involved, and they thought it was really fun because it was kind of like, you know, finding a treasure, a little bit of a treasure hunt. So it was a fun way to involve the kids. So dads and moms have to be on board in this process of getting your kids to eat healthier. It's necessary for all family members to be willing to improve the food quality and variety. Mom and dad especially need to model healthy choices and a willingness to try new foods. I think it's very important that whoever cooks the meal receives some compliments from whoever else is at the table. So if mom cooked the meal, dad should, you know, compliment the meal and express how delicious the meals are and how lucky they are to have such good food. That really imprints upon the kids that having a family dinner together and having a good meal is meaningful. And it may encourage them to try new foods if they see mom or dad demonstrating or modeling that behavior. And have a sit-down dinner as much as possible without screen time. Turn the TV off, put the phones away, and have a conversation. This is a great way to connect as a family and to get in touch with your kids and check in with them on how their day went. All right, back to quality first. Eat real food. You should be able to identify all the ingredients in your food. So that comes to reading labels, but it also comes to just purchasing single ingredient items to combine and prepare foods at home. That way you know everything that's in your food. Exclude foods with ingredients that sound more like chemical compounds. Buy fresh versus frozen or canned whenever possible. There's a few staples that I do keep on hand that are canned, and that's often like stewed tomatoes or beans, just because beans can be difficult to prep and prepare if you're wanting to use them quickly. Coconut milk is another thing that we keep as a canned staple. Frozen items, vegetables are never really tasty after they've been frozen. So if you're, you know, trying to get your kids to eat more vegetables, I would not advise doing anything that has been frozen because it just kind of turns to mush when you cook it. They're okay if they're like peas and corn that you're adding to things, but for the most part, frozen vegetables never taste really good after they have been frozen. You want to look for foods that have a higher nutrient content. So pure proteins, whole grain carbs, healthy fats, like nuts and avocados. All of these things have a higher nutrient content because they're purer foods. Eat at home more often. You know, that way we know what is going into our foods. We try to limit eating out to maybe once a week and do the majority of our food prep and cooking at home. You want to model healthy eating for your kids. So if your kids see you eating healthy foods, they're going to be more inclined to eat healthy foods themselves. Avoid most fast food restaurants because, as we know, a lot of restaurant food, particularly fast food restaurants, have cheap and low quality ingredients. That's why it's cheap. It's got a lot of fillers, it's got a lot of additives, a lot of preservatives. Across the board, it's just not healthy food. I think all of us know that. On occasion, it's not a bad thing, but it should not be a regular part of yours or your kids' diet. All right, so back to the organic or conventional. We know that organics, and studies have shown this, have a higher nutrient content than conventional foods. They're free of pesticides and herbicides that compromise health, digestion, and promote chronic disease. What we're doing when we're choosing organics is we're reducing our lifetime exposure to toxic chemicals. So we can't control all of the things that we're exposed to out in the world, but we can make better choices on what to bring into our own home and to put into our own bodies. It's important for children as they're greatly impacted by toxins due to metabolic differences in developmental stages. So kids are a lot more vulnerable to the effects of these pesticides and herbicides such as glyphosate. They have smaller bodies and they're growing rapidly, and their brains and their nervous systems are growing and changing rapidly. So trying to reduce toxic exposures is really important during these developmental stages. Environmental Working Group is a great resource for foods, for products you use in your home. They kind of rate things to tell you like what their toxicity level is. And then when it comes to foods, they have some great shopper's guides. they have what is called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And so the Dirty Dozen lists the 12 conventional produce items that typically have the highest level of pesticides. And the Clean 15 are the 15 conventional produce items that tend to be very low in pesticides. So if you have to really pick and choose which produce you're going to buy organically, you want to choose items from the Dirty Dozen. So those are better to choose organically. And if you have to keep costs down, you know that all of the items on the Clean 15 list tend to have very low levels of pesticides if you have to buy those conventionally. This is overall a great resource for determining chemical content in common products. So personal care products like makeup, shampoo, and cleaning products, and then foods as well. So it's a really great website. If you're not familiar with it, go take a look at it. They have a lot of great materials that you can learn from. So this whole idea of kid food, I've always struggled with this because, this is a way to directly market to our kids for food products that are like visually appealing to kids, because they kind of look like little toys. They're little finger foods, they can handle them easily, but they're really lacking in substance and nutrition. Kids like them because they see other kids eating them, and they're easy to handle because kids like finger foods and convenience foods. So things like chicken nuggets, Cheerios, Happy Meals, Go-Gurts, which are like those yogurt things in a tube, Goldfish cereal bars, mac and cheese. These are common foods that, kids really get attached to. But if you don't make them a major part of their diet, and you eat more real foods at home, it's not going to be such a big deal. I think that when a family sits down to dinner, that everybody should have the same food. It shouldn't be kid food and adult food. It's just all food, and we should all eat the same thing. Occasional consumption of these things are okay. I mean, sometimes you can't get away from it if your kids are in sports or going to birthday parties or go over to other kids' houses. There's a lot of these foods around, and so they become the occasional food, but it shouldn't be part of your staples if you're really trying to eat a healthier diet. Look for healthy alternatives to some of these things. You can Google healthy kid food, and I'm sure many of you parents out there have, and you can find endless suggestions for healthy alternatives to snacks and other things that you can make at home or that are simple to have on hand and prepare. Even some of the packaged things, like, at Costco, you can find some very good granola bars, things like that are pretty good, like paleo bars. The ingredients are pretty pure. We all need to have things that we can grab quickly, if our schedules are crammed and we have to get out of the house and the kids are hungry and you're going to be gone for a few hours. You want to have some foods that are available. We know that there's going to be those events that occur, so you have to be mentally prepared and just seek some of those things out so you can have some of those grab and go foods available. All right, so in general, what are some of the guidelines for feeding our kids in a good way? What do they need? They need calories, they need macronutrients, micronutrients, and hydration. So calories are basically the amount of energy a food provides. And the amount of energy that that food gives us should be the amount of energy that we put out. If we consume more energy than we put out, we gain weight. If we don't consume enough energy, and we put out more than we consume, we lose weight. So you want to make sure that kids are getting what they need in terms of the calories to support activity levels and growth. Macronutrients are basically carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Fiber could also qualify as a macronutrient. And micronutrients are all of the vitamins and minerals. So the water-soluble vitamins, fat-soluble vitamins, macro minerals, trace minerals, phytonutrients that you find in plant foods, and essential fats. And then, of course, hydration, making sure that our kids are getting enough water. And a way to determine that our kids are getting enough water is they should consume half of their body weight in ounces. So if you have a kid that weighs 50 pounds, they should consume 25 ounces of water per day. And fruit juices don't count. So these are the basic caloric needs for growing children. And you can find these charts and tables online. I just happened to pull this one because I thought it was pretty clear about how many calories different age groups need. And the male-female changes typically occur as they start to enter the teenage years and go through puberty. Boys tend to grow a little bit more and grow more muscle mass, so they need some more calories. And the determination, obviously, give or take, depends on the activity level of the child. So this is just an average and gives you an idea of how many calories growing kids need. And so I think it's important for us to understand, you know, when it does come to fast food, based on the caloric needs of a kid and the calories that certain fast foods provide, you can see how kids can very quickly, if they're consuming a lot of these foods, even just as one meal or a couple times a day, can tend to get perhaps too many calories if they're not active enough. I found it very interesting that this chicken burrito from Chipotle was 1,165 calories. So, you know, a lot of times kids, especially growing boys, teenage boys, love things like this because they're big and they're hungry all the time. You know, so it depends really on the activity level of your kids. If you have growing boys in your house, if you have teenage boys, it's amazing how much food they can put away. And I do think that some of the calorie guidelines may not always apply to some growing boys. If they have a really fast metabolism and they're involved in sports, they probably need more than the standard 2,000 to 2,200 calories per day. So again, it's important to know activity level and tendency and how much these kids need to eat. So here's just a basic guide. I think when it comes to food, a picture is worth 1,000 words when it comes to balancing our macronutrients and what those macronutrients really are. And there is some crossover. So I like this diagram because it's kind of like a Venn diagram where you get crossover, where you have your carbohydrate foods on the left. So you've got some fruits, you've got grains, you've got a crossover between beans and nuts that would be considered carbs and proteins. Then you have your high protein foods in the middle. And then you have your crossover of protein and fatty foods, dairy and fish and more nuts as well. And then you have your foods that are rich in fats, your oils, avocados, and nuts and seeds and coconut. So how should we balance our macronutrients? So there's a lot of ideas out there, you know, ranging from, you know, a very low carbohydrate diet, the ketogenic diet. I don't recommend that in kids because kids need carbohydrates to grow and to support their energy production. So I think we have to just be more balanced and not be extreme when it comes to feeding our kids. As parents and adults, you've done all of your growing. You know, you're free to try things on yourselves, but I think it's important just to make sure that our kids get whatever foods they're eating, that they're of high quality and that they're getting enough of each macronutrient to support energy and growth. So typically, carbohydrates should be to 40 to 65% of their diet, fats 20 to 35%, and proteins 10 to 15%. These percentages are appropriate for teens and adults. Infants and young children need a higher percentage of fat at about 25 to 40%. And infants and children need more fat because their brains and their nervous systems are still growing and developing. And you need a lot of healthy fat to support that. I like the fact that this little diagram is round like a plate. So when you think about making meals, you want to have a good visual of what that balanced macronutrient ratio should look like. So here's something that's a little more visual, and I love that it's on a plate. So you can see over to the left when we're talking about carbohydrates, we're not just talking about starchy carbohydrates. Most people think of carbohydrates as breads and grains and cereals and crackers and those starchy things, but Vegetables and fruits fall into the carbohydrate category too. So when it comes to choosing your carbohydrates, the majority of them should be plant-based from vegetables and some fruits. And then about a quarter of that can be some carbohydrates that are starchier, like butternut squash, whole grain spaghettis and noodles, and brown rice, and whole grain breads if your kids can eat breads. And then you want to think about the protein foods and the fat foods comprise about another quarter of that plate. So this just gives you a good visual as to what a good balanced meal would look like. All right, so carbohydrates. Why do we need carbohydrates? They've been sort of vilified for the past 20 years or so, but it really depends on the type of carbohydrate that you're choosing. Not all carbohydrates are bad carbohydrates. So this little picture that we have, those are good carbohydrates when we're looking at this. We have vegetables, we have some fruits, we have some whole grains, and we have some beans. So these are basically healthy carbohydrates. Why do we need carbs? Well, they provide energy and regulate blood glucose. They spare the use of protein for energy so that it's available to build tissues, which is really important for kids because the protein that they consume needs to go to building their body. They need that protein to build new tissues and keep everything supported as they grow. It provides fuel for the central nervous system in the brain. It's needed for the breakdown of fatty acids and the prevention of ketosis. So people who want to burn fat, you need to have a little carbohydrate around to stimulate the fat burning. It's sort of like the kindling in a fire. You have to make sure that you've got something to get it going. It provides some sweetness to foods. It's a source of soluble and insoluble fiber. And all carbohydrates eventually break down to glucose, but the quality of the carbohydrate can be determined by its how quickly it breaks down into glucose. So the carbohydrates that you see in this picture here are good carbohydrates in that they're more complex carbs. It takes longer for them to break down, so they're not going to spike your blood sugar like eating, drinking a soda, or eating sugary cookies or cakes or candies would. So here's examples of some healthy carbohydrates: whole grains, colorful vegetables, fruits, tubers and starchy vegetables, and legumes. So when it comes to whole grains, choosing things like oats and brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat, millet, sprouted whole grain breads, gluten-free options are available if you're gluten-free. So there's a lot to choose from there. I think it's important to get familiar with some of these grains that maybe you've never tried before, like quinoa or millet. They're very tasty and it adds some variety to your diet. Colorful vegetables, again, eat the rainbow. Choose a variety of different colors. That way you're getting a variety of phytonutrients and antioxidants. So the more color you have, the better. Fruits always are great for kids. They love fruits as finger foods because they're kind of sweet and they taste good. So choosing things like apples and bananas and berries, melons, stone fruit. Stone fruit's basically like peaches, nectarines, and plums. So just get them used to a variety of flavors and textures. And starchy things like sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, you can find such a variety of potatoes now. There's, red skin potatoes, which are good, gold potatoes, and purple potatoes. So if you think about these purple potatoes, they're rich in different phytonutrients than regular white potatoes. They have different things that add that color that have certain antioxidants. So trying a wide variety. Jicama is a root vegetable that's kind of sweet like an apple. Carrots are good, cassava root, radishes, beets, and squash varieties. Beets are very sweet, so adding beets to food can be interesting to kids because they're pink. So you can combine like beets and sweet potatoes and make a mash, and you end up with like this beautifully colored pinkish mash, which is kind of interesting. And you can add some good grass-fed organic butter. And so kids like these things because they're colorful and interesting to them. And then legumes, beans, lentils, peas, and peanuts. So these are all forms of healthy carbohydrates that you want to include in your child's diet. All right, so fats, what are the good fats? What are the bad fats? So this is a great picture. Most people think of fish as being a high protein food, but hot fatty fish like salmon and mackerel and sardines have good omega-3 fats, which most people don't get enough of. We've got flax seeds and chia seeds and beans, which can also have some fats in them. Avocados, coconut, walnuts, other types of seeds. Eggs are a great source of healthy fat as well. So fats are a great fuel source. They provide 9 kilocalories per gram. So that's about twice, a little more than twice as much as carbohydrates and proteins provide. Protein and carbohydrates only provide 4 calories per gram. So they're more dense food, which means we don't need to eat as much of them because they're calorie dense. Fats are a storage form of energy. When we do not have an immediate need for the energy we consume, we store it as fat for later use. So even if you overconsume protein or carbohydrates, if your body can't make use of those calories, it's going to store them as fat for later use. Fats compose the bilipid membrane of every cell in your body. So fats build the cell walls of all of your tissues. So it's important to have really good healthy fats so that your cells are healthy. Fats provide insulation and protection to our vital organs. So it's important, we're supposed to have some fat on our body. We're not supposed to be extremely lean and thin because we also lose the fat that supports our vital organs. Fats aid in the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, A, E, D, and K. So we need to get fat in our diet to get those nutrients. Fats are also a source of essential fatty acids, the omega-6s and the omega-3s. And these are referred to as essential fatty acids because we cannot make them. We have to get them in our diet. Fats support healthy nervous system and brain development. So they're also a source of cholesterol if they're animal sourced. Which are needed for the formation of bile and is a precursor for all steroid hormones. And fats are also a good source of choline, which is needed for the formation of bile, neurotransmitter synthesis, brain development, and cognitive function. It also can serve as a methyl donor. So a good source of choline would be eggs or egg yolks. And this is great for brain development. If your kids are not allergic to eggs, eggs are such a great food because you can do so many things with them. They're very versatile, and you can add things to them. You can put them in things. So eggs are very healthy for brain development. The important role of dietary fats in childhood development. Essential fats are crucial in the healthy development of the brain, nervous system, and the retina. Necessary for the healthy fetal development, especially in the 3rd trimester. So moms should take between 600 to 800 milligrams of DHA and about 100 milligrams of EPA. So if you're supplementing, look on your bottle. Oftentimes these are now included in a high quality prenatal supplement, but you want to make sure that you're getting an adequate amount of these good omegas. Improved cognitive development in children with adequate fat intake. Breast milk is approximately 50% fat. So that gives us some idea of how important fat is for infants and young children. It's very supportive of the development of their brain and nervous system. So if breast milk is about 50% fat, that tells you that it's absolutely necessary because that's straight from nature. Breast milk is approximately 50% fat. Oh, I repeated myself. Signs of deficiency. Kids who have dry, scaly skin have developed eczema. Eczema can come from not getting enough fat-soluble vitamins or just not enough fat in the diet. It can also be a sign that your child is allergic to something. Kids who are more allergy prone may have some fatty acid deficiencies, decreased growth or increased susceptibility to infections and or poor wound healing. So if that is going on in your household, you may want to try to get more fat into your kids' diet or put them on a good supplement, which I'm going to talk about here at the end of this lecture. All right, so types of fats. Fats are basically divided into being saturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, as part of the polyunsaturated fats, we have the essential fats, and we have monosaturated fats and trans fats. So saturated fats basically are solid at room temperature. Butter, animal fat, dairy fat, coconut oil, palm oil, or lard. Polyunsaturated fats, also referred to as PUFAs, you can find that in fatty fish, nuts, seeds, vegetable oils. You know, that's the majority of what you find in bottles if you were to buy vegetable oils. And essential fats are a component of those, so the omega-3s and the omega-6s. They have to come from dietary sources, so you want to choose high quality sources, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Monounsaturated fats are things like olives, avocados, nuts, seeds, certain vegetable oils. And trans fats are the ones that we hear about that we really don't want to get in our diet because they're usually part of processed food. And what they do is they take an unsaturated fat and they add hydrogen to it to make it more solid at room temperature so that it does not go rancid. It's really created that way so that it has a longer shelf life, because if oils go rancid, you taste it. You can pick that up very quickly on your tongue. And so food makers don't want to use oils that are going to go bad because it decreases the shelf life of their product. You can find some trans fats. They occur naturally in certain meats and dairy fats, but these are more natural trans fats. So this is just another diagram. I like using pictures when it comes to foods because people kind of get the whole thing all at once. So examples of saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, trans fats, and polyunsaturated fats. So when it comes to the trans fats, these are the partially hydrogenated oils. So if you see that listed as an ingredient on that, you know, packaged food that you're going to buy, it's probably good to avoid it because it's not a great fat to include in your diet. All right, so for healthy fats, you want to focus on quality fats. Processed and heated fats are poor quality. Partially hydrogenated oils and packaged foods should be avoided as much as possible. And you don't often know what you're getting when you go out to eat. So if you can have control at home, exercise that control. Saturated fats, good sources are organic butter, use organic full-fat dairy products. And I say full-fat because, again, for kids, especially the younger ones, if they take the fat out of the dairy, you're also losing out on those fat-soluble vitamins. And oftentimes they remove all the fat and then put the synthetic version back in. And nutrients usually come as a complex. And so when you take the fat out, you're not only taking out the fat-soluble vitamins, you're taking out all of the other components that support your body's ability to absorb those nutrients. So again, use organic full-fat dairy and just have less of it. I think you're getting a superior product if you also have the fat in it. Grass-fed beef and other pastured meats. We know that grass-fed beef have a better meat quality. The fats in the meat are actually healthier. They're higher in some omega-3s because they're eating different types of grasses rather than eating grain to just fatten them up. Use coconut and palm oil as they contain some medium chain triglycerides, which increase fat burning. So you can also find like liquid MCT oil, which is good to add to smoothies. It has a very mild taste, so it's easy to use in cold products like smoothies or even to put on cooked oats or something. So that's a good source of fat, especially if your kids are super active and they get hungry a lot. So giving them good healthy fats to help sustain them, because fats have twice as many calories as carbs do. So they need to have a balance of both, but if you're going to give them fats, give them some really good high quality fat. Saturated fats are useful because they can withstand higher cooking temperatures. And this should compose about 10 to 20% of your total fat consumption. So polyunsaturated fats or monounsaturated fats, you want to avoid excessive canola oil. Canola oil is in
most packaged foods. It's in, you know, pre-made salad dressings. It's in a lot of things. And it was really touted as being this really healthy oil, but it's really not that great because of the way it's processed. It's not cold pressed, it's heated. So there's some oxidation that goes on there, and they often use a chemical called hexane to extract the oil from the seed. And so it's not really the healthiest oil. It's just cheap to produce, so you know, we've been told that it's healthy for us, but it's really not the best. I prefer olive oil. It's good for dressings and condiments, and use for low temp cooking. You can put olive oil over steamed vegetables, so it's a good oil to use if you're not cooking at a really high temp. Flax, nut, and seed oils cannot be heated, but they're also good sources of polyunsaturated fats and some essential fats. Flax oil is good in salad dressings. It can also be good in smoothies. Good sources of these types of fats are nuts and seeds, avocados, olives, and some fatty fish. All right, let's talk a little more about the essential fats and how this breaks down. So we have the omega-6s and the omega-3s. Most people can very easily get enough omega-6s. They tend to be more predominant in our diets because of the sources that they come from. So we have to focus more on trying to get enough of the omega-3s. You'd find omega-6s in sources such as flax, hemp, nuts, seeds, borage oil, evening primrose oil, black currant seed oil. Now the borage, evening primrose, and black currant seed oil, these are all mostly in supplement form, and a lot of people take them for a variety of reasons, but they're higher in omega-6s than they are in omega-3s. Certain meats, poultry, and eggs are also high in omega-6s. They help to regulate gene expression, they support the immune system, they regulate blood clotting, and they support skin health. Omega-3s are easy to get from nuts and seeds and other vegetable oils. EPA and DHA, the ones we tend to focus on in terms of supplementation, are primarily from fish and seafood, which is why the source of your EPA DHA supplement is going to be some kind of fish oil, whether you know it's from cod liver oil or some other fatty fish. Your body can take the alpha linolenic acid and convert it to EPA, but it can't convert it effectively to DHA. It has a role in brain and nervous system development and health overall, and it's best to supplement if you do not eat fatty fish, because that's going to be one of your main sources. All of the sources of fatty foods that are rich in omega-6s may have some omega-3s, but again, they tend to be weighted more towards the omega-6s, the plant-based sources. And so you have to really work more at getting the omega-3s. So if you don't eat salmon or any of the other fatty fish, it's probably good to supplement. All right, so protein foods. This is a great picture of just your typical protein foods. And again, you see some crossover because nuts contain protein and fat. And there's just foods that don't fall into one category. Just because they're considered a protein food doesn't mean they don't have carbs and fats in them. It's just where they tend to be more weighted. So protein is needed for growth and repair of tissues. It's how our body builds itself. We need protein for the building blocks of bone, muscle, cartilage, skin, and blood. Protein is used to make hormones, enzymes, and other chemical messengers. Forms the structural proteins in our body, the collagen, keratin, and elastin. It's needed to maintain proper pH balance, needed to maintain fluid balance in our bodies, to support our immune health. It transports and stores nutrients and provides a source of energy. So notice that protein as a source of energy is at the bottom. We really want to spare protein so that, especially in kids, so that protein can be used to build their bodies. We don't necessarily want them to use protein as a source of energy, which is why you need to make sure they have adequate healthy carbs and good fats to support that. All right, so what are healthy proteins? Proteins are found in most foods, even though they may not be considered a high protein food. So everything is some sort of ratio of protein, fats, and carbs for the most part. Animal sources of protein would include grass-fed meats, free-range poultry, wild fish, organic dairy or raw dairy, and eggs. You want to try and avoid farmed fish, processed meats, and meat from animals treated with growth hormone and antibiotics. So, just trust your sources, get to know your butchers in town or your sources of healthy meats, read the label. If you're buying frozen products, just read the label to see what the source is, and if they use growth hormone or antibiotics. If they don't use growth hormone or antibiotics, they usually like to tell you that because it's a selling point for whoever's making the product. Avoiding farmed fish, I think we know that like farmed salmon, it does not have the healthiest fat ratio. It's kind of like cattle that are raised on grain as opposed to being grass-fed. They are what they eat, just as we are what we eat. And so if fish aren't able to eat what they're supposed to be eating, what nature is telling them to eat, the composition of their meats is going to be different as well. Plant sources of protein would include nuts, seeds, beans with grains. You need to make sure you eat some beans with some kind of rice or something to make sure that you have all the amino acids to make a complete protein. Soy, certain grains like quinoa, spelt, kamut, teff, amaranth, sorghum, and bulgur tend to be higher in protein. So for people who are really focusing more on plant-based foods, you can know that some of these products are providing you with some protein. Okay, I had to get a drink of water. So this is just another visual. This is just taken from the Savvy Dietitian. And again, with food, we eat with our eyes first, so we're very visual when it comes to food. So showing pictures of food, I think, gives you a good idea of what protein sources look like. And so we have plant protein sources on the left, and we have animal sources of protein on the right. And I think most people get basic macronutrient breakdown. It's when we get into some of the more subtle things like plant sources of protein that it gets a little more confusing, because they're not going to be as high in protein as the animal sources of protein, but they do have some protein in them. So, if you're doing the occasional vegetarian meal, then you want to choose some of these higher plant protein foods to be part of those meals. So fiber is important, not just for grandma and grandpa. It's important for everybody. And if you're eating a lot of processed foods, it's likely that you're not getting enough fiber or your kids aren't getting enough fiber. So how does it really break down? How much fiber do we need? Most of the diets that are high in plant-based foods have good sources of fiber. If you're eating a lot of vegetables, you're eating some whole grains, even nuts and seeds can be a source of fiber. But if you're eating a lot of processed foods where the fiber has been stripped out, you're not getting enough fiber in your diet. So, just if you're focusing on a lot of vegetables and whole grain foods, then you're likely going to get enough, but you never know. If your kids are tending to be more constipated, then you might need to incorporate some fiber supplements in their diet. You can do, a lot of ground flax seeds are great if you do smoothies. So you want to choose something that is a source of soluble fiber or insoluble fiber. It's easier to come by to get soluble fiber because that's mostly in our plant foods. Sources of soluble fiber as a supplement would be just bran. It could be oat bran. You can add that to homemade baked goods so you can increase the fiber content. Supplements might be pectin, flaxseed, psyllium, acacia, beet fiber, or guar gum. So if you have kids that tend to be more constipated and you're trying to bulk up their stool a little bit, or they've just got some digestive issues, making sure that they're getting enough fiber is something that's really basic, and it's almost so basic that people overlook it. So if your kids have some gut issues, make sure they're getting enough fiber. Insoluble sources of fiber, you would most likely see this in a supplement of some kind, would be cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignans. I kind of think of those as like, wood fiber almost. They're very insoluble. They don't dissolve in water. And so for kids who have a very compact stool, almost pellet-like, what the insoluble fiber can tend to do is bulk up the stool so that their bowels move easier. Lignans are typically found in flax seeds as well. So flax seeds are a great source of fiber because they don't taste bad. And you can grind them up and you can put them in smoothies and baked goods too. You can add them to cooked oats. And so they're getting a little soluble and insoluble fiber. And if they're eating some oats, they'll be getting some good fiber there as well. The daily recommendation for fiber for adults, women need 25 to 30 grams per day. Men need 38 to 50 grams per day. Children need about 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories of food. So, and that's going to be age and size dependent. So what are some of the top 10 highest fiber foods? So this kind of gives you a breakdown. You can look up fiber content of any food online. So I'm just trying to give you an idea. If women are supposed to have 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day, you can look and say, okay, what about chia seeds? They have, per 2 tablespoons, they have about 10 grams of dietary fiber, which is pretty good. So adding chia seeds to something that you're baking or to a smoothie is a great way to get some added fiber. Looking at like acorn squash, 9 grams of fiber per cup cooked. Avocados, which are typically a fatty food, but they've got 13 grams of fiber per avocado. So getting a good sense of whether or not you're getting enough fiber is just kind of having an understanding and looking at the common foods you eat to make that determination. Are you getting enough fiber in your diet? Or is your child getting enough fiber in their diet? All right, so the issue with sugar, sugar is a big problem because it's in so many foods, not just foods that we would consider sweet, but in foods that really aren't that sweet, like spaghetti sauce or something like that. Sugar is added almost as a preservative, and because as Americans, we've grown so accustomed to that sweet flavor that it's put in there so that we favor one brand or product over another. It's almost very primitive to desire sugar because, back when we were cave people, that desire for something sweet would indicate to us that it was a high energy food. It was going to provide us with a lot of energy. So we have this natural desire to like sweet foods, but we've gotten so accustomed to exceptionally sweet foods that we can't even really taste the sweetness in vegetables. We consider them to kind of be bitter or have a bad flavor because we become so accustomed to when a food has a sweetness to it that it's exceptionally sweet because of all of the added sugar. So when it comes to examining a food and determining if it's got a lot of sugar, one way to start is to say, okay, the amount of added sugar should be limited to 25 grams per day. And so what do I mean by added sugar? That is the sugar that got added in addition to the naturally occurring sugars that might already be in the product. So it's the added sugar. I think yogurt is a good example of that, sweetened yogurt. Usually a small carton of yogurt can have anywhere between 15 and 25 grams of sugar. They're very, very sweetened, and it's usually the majority of it is added sugar because plain yogurt doesn't taste like sweetened yogurt. So added sugar, and this is determined by the USDA, is that it should be limited to 25 grams per day. So you need to read labels, and they're starting to change food labels a bit, showing the total sugars and the added sugar. And keep in mind that 1 teaspoon of sugar is equal to 4 grams. So if something has 20 grams of added sugar, that is 5 teaspoons of sugar. That's a lot of sugar for a single serving. Some food labels list added sugars separately from the total sugars, allowing the consumer to determine what are natural sugars versus what is added. Read the labels. Sugar goes by many names and is often used in foods to preserve and enhance flavor. If any form of sugar is listed within the first 3 ingredients, it's likely a very high sugar food. So I would put it away if it's got a ton of sugar. Be aware and consume sweet foods in moderation. So when it comes to sweet foods, we all like to have a little sweet now and then. Just be selective. Choose something that's good, that you really like. So and try to exclude foods that have excess sugar that don't really qualify as that sweet food that you desired. I don't expect you to read all of these, but I just wanted you to have an example of the different names that sugar can go under as an ingredient. So you can find things like this online, but there's many different names for sugar and many different forms of sugar. So just be aware that anything ending in OSE is a sugar. Anything that is in the syrup form is a sugar. Usually something that's crystallized is a sugar. Anything that ends in an OL is a sugar alcohol. So anyway, it's just to be aware and read the labels on your food. And here's an example of a label showing where you would find added sugars. So you can see that whatever this product is, it contains 1 gram of sugar, and it has no added sugar. So you want to look under the sugars content and see if there's an added sugar rating below it or measurement below it. All right, so let's talk about picky eaters, because I know that a lot of parents out there listening are kind of hoping to get some tips on what to do with picky eaters, because as parents, you're really trying to get your kids to eat a more balanced diet. And so we've talked about the more practical aspects of things, of incorporating them in food choices and menus and shopping and food prep. But there's always going to be those picky eaters out there. And so sometimes it's just a phase. It can be common in kids aged 2 to 3 years old because they have a fear of new foods. But it could also be common in neurotypical kids as well as those with developmental disorders, because they have an issue with the texture of the food. They have a sensory issue somehow, or they have an oral motor issue where they have difficulty manipulating the food in their mouth. They have like a swallowing disorder, which can cause them to gag or choke. They may also have some speech disorders as well. They may tend to tongue thrust. They may have some difficulty with proper pronunciation of things. If you're noticing that within your kids and they also happen to be a picky eater, you might want to have them evaluated. You can take kids to feeding specialists. A lot of times speech therapists also can specialize in feeding disorders because it involves the mouth and the movement of the tongue. So they may be able to make some determination of what's going on if your child is expressing some of these behaviors. Kids can also have food allergies or sensitivities to foods, and not necessarily that they will be have an aversion to those foods, but they have a strong desire to eat some of the foods that they're really allergic to. And like wheat and dairy can be an example of that because of the gluten and the casein and how it reacts in the brain. And if these kids stop eating these foods, they start to detox from them. And you'll see some behavioral disorders as a result of it. So kids will often be very attached to certain categories of foods, sometimes if they're allergic to that food. Certain digestive disorders like maldigestion, malabsorption, difficulty absorbing or digesting certain foods, or if they've got some bowel or gastritis or some kind of inflammation going on along their intestinal tract, or if they have constipation, they may be particularly picky about the food. If they're really young and they're not verbal, they may not be able to tell you those things. So I think it's important to just explore what might be going on with them physiologically that might be driving some of their food choices or food aversions. You also want to consider gluten casein, especially within the autism community. Most of you out there are familiar with the gluten and casein-free diet. and why going gluten and casein free can have such an effect on the brain development of these kids, and even neurotypical kids. We know that gluten and casein contain gluteomorphin and casomorphins, which are opioid-like peptides that are released when you consume gluten and casein. They bind to opiate receptors in the brain and have a morphine-like effect, creating cravings or addictions to these kinds of foods. And this can happen in neurotypical kids as well. So if they desire a lot of wheat and dairy products, you might want to take a look at those things and try to substitute and wean them off of them. Kids can also have yeast overgrowth or other microbes, which can definitely increase their cravings for carbs and sugars. Naturally, kids are going to gravitate towards carby, sweeter foods. But if they really have a strong desire for those things, it may be driven by something other than themselves. They may have some yeast overgrowth, and in order for the yeast to survive, it needs sugar and carbohydrates. So, you know, you have to get them off of these foods and allow for some of these things to die off. It can take a little while, it may take a week or so, but once the yeast dies back a little bit, the cravings can subside. And then there's food additives. Artificial colors, flavors, preservatives, and flavor enhancers like MSG can have a stimulating effect on the brain, leading to addiction and cravings. So again, this is why back at the beginning I was saying avoid these food additives. You know, we really don't know what they're doing in these young bodies, so best to avoid them as much as possible. Common food allergens, you know, there's the categories of food on the left, and then there are certain chemical compounds on the right. So if you feel like your child has some food allergies or sensitivities, you can certainly do some simple testing through Great Plains Lab and see if they've got some IgG food sensitivities. And the common allergens or intolerances tend to be dairy, wheat and gluten, corn, tree nuts, peanuts, eggs, soy, citrus, fish and other shellfish, and chocolate. Those are the common ones. So if you can't do a food allergy test, you can at least remove some of these things from their diet to see if perhaps some of their symptoms improve. And then there's chemical compounds in foods that are naturally occurring, but there are certain foods that have higher levels of these things, which may contribute to some behavioral disorders or certain patterns of illness. You know, like if somebody is really sensitive to high histamine in their foods and they don't have the ability to break down and eliminate that histamine, they may have a lot of skin rashes and sinus issues and things that you would see when somebody is having an allergic reaction, but they just have a higher level of histamines in their system. Histamines are also found in foods. Phenols, salicylates, sulfites, lactose, fructose, MSG, and oxalates. These are all natural compounds found in food, but in certain kids, they can trigger certain types of reactions. So if as a parent, you have gotten your kids off of the foods that perhaps they're sensitive to, but they still are having some issues, you may want to look specifically at foods that contain these compounds. And I'm going to mention some resources later because this gets very specific. I'll mention some resources that you can educate yourself on some of these things. So let's talk a little bit about allergy versus intolerance. So we use the term interchangeably a lot, like allergy and sensitivity. But an allergy is typically something that involves an acute immune reaction where the symptoms can appear relatively quickly. So you kind of know it right away if somebody's allergic to something. They can get hives and itching and swelling and a runny nose. Their skin can flush. They may have immediate nausea, vomiting, or loose stools. Babies can get colicky. There can be reflux. They can develop long-term eczema. And kids who have a lot of food allergies can develop failure to thrive. So they just, because of the allergy to the food, if it's something they're consuming a lot of, it could be creating a lot of inflammation in their gut. They may not be absorbing the nutrients from their food. And obviously the most extreme reaction to something that is allergenic would be anaphylaxis, where you get a severe reaction leading to difficulty breathing and a major drop in blood pressure. You see that commonly in people who have a peanut allergy. If they're allergic to peanuts, that reaction can tend to be very extreme. So an intolerance or a sensitivity, it's less obvious because the reaction can be delayed by several hours or days. So it's hard to know sometimes. And this is where testing comes in, because you might know that your kids are sensitive to certain foods, but you can't link the symptom back to a particular food because too much time has gone by. Typical symptoms of a food intolerance would be bloating, nausea, diarrhea, headaches, rashes, abdominal pain, reflux, gut inflammation, and constipation. All right, so testing. We know that Great Plains has some great food allergy testing. You can do IgE food allergy testing, which is done through serum, and that is more of an immediate reaction to food, or you can do IgG food sensitivity testing. The nice thing is this is done with a dried blood spot, so you can just do a finger prick and get a few drops of blood, and that dried blood spot can be tested against 90 different foods. The nice thing is that you also can look at Candida antibodies on this test. There are also specific panels available, so you have your standard food panel and you have your Asian food sensitivity panels. You also get a measurement of total IgG, so you know that if you want to measure total IgG against the IgG food sensitivity, because total IgG, if it's within the normal range, it shows you that there's a valid response to those food antigens. You get a measurement of the Candida antibodies to determine the role that Candida may be playing in some of those food sensitivities as well. So it's actually a really good panel if you can't clearly identify anything that your child may be reacting to, but you know that they've perhaps got some eczema or some digestive issues, they never feel good. It's important to get them off of the foods they may be sensitive to, and doing a test can certainly guide you in that process. So special diets, obviously the gluten-free diet and dairy-free. So these are, you know, parents of kids who are on the autism spectrum are very familiar with going gluten and dairy-free to try and get their kids off of the gluteomorphins and the casomorphins. And so, you know, I just want you to keep in mind that gluten-free doesn't always mean it's healthy. There's a lot of gluten-free junk food out there. It just happens to be gluten-free. So again, read labels because they can have a lot of fillers and junk in them. So I don't want you to equate gluten-free with healthy. Gluten-free can be healthy, but it doesn't always mean it is healthy. So read the labels. Dairy-free alternatives, you know, there's nut and seed milks. We have to be concerned sometimes that almond milk, which is a readily available form of nut milk, can be high in oxalates. So if your kids have issues with oxalates as determined by an organic acid test, you may want to choose a different form of milk that isn't as high in oxalates. You can make nut milks at home pretty easily. You basically just blend them in the blender with some water and strain them through some cheesecloth, and then you can add some, you know, maybe a teaspoon or so of maple syrup just to give it a little sweetness. And you can also soak the nuts because it helps to increase the digestibility. Soy milk, I'm not a big fan because most soy is, you know, GMO soy. Especially if it's not organic. And for kids, you know, they can tend to get really, really addicted to their milk, whatever the milk is that they're drinking. And if they're doing a lot of soy milk, you have to consider soy is very estrogenic. We use it when we get older to produce hormones. It becomes the substrate from which estrogen is made and progesterone. So it has the ability to be very estrogenic. So we don't want to give our kids something that has a high estrogenic effect. It's also very high in phytates, which are compounds in soy and other things like nuts that can bind minerals unless it's soaked or properly produced. and they can tend to be goitrogenic, so they inhibit thyroid function. So too much soy and soy as a milk for kids, I think, is not a great choice. Coconut milk, you mostly find this as canned. You can find boxed versions, but they tend to have some additives and fillers. You can make homemade coconut milk by just getting, shredded coconut and soaking it and grinding it up in a high-powered blender and straining it, similar to nut milks. So these things can be made at home. And I know that, a lot of moms are like, yeah, rolling their eyes like, I've got time for that, right? So you can find cartoned coconut milks out there. Some of them do have some fillers and things so that they don't separate out. So keeping some of that in your cabinet, or keeping some of the canned milk in your cabinet, is also a good way to go. We all don't have time to, always make these things, but they are an option. So vegetarian and vegan diets for kids, I'm not an advocate of either for growing children, because it's very hard, especially with kids, if you figure that they self-limit sometimes and they get very picky and particular about foods. If you're pulling entire food groups out of their diet, you're really limiting the availability of nutrients to them. And if once they're grown and an adult, they can make that decision on their own. But I think it's really important to provide growing kids with a wide variety of foods and nutrient sources. And if we remove entire categories of foods, they're going to end up being deficient in B12, folate, and iron particularly. And some will argue that plant-based foods do have B12, folate, and iron, but they're not as bioavailable as heme sources of these nutrients. So I think all kids need to get a good variety of foods. It's not to say that a child can't thrive on a vegetarian diet. It's just that as a parent, you have to be super conscientious about them getting enough protein and getting all of the nutrients that they need, and making sure that they're supplementing where needed. What tends to happen too with vegetarian kids is there's too much replacement of protein foods with soy products, which can be problematic for the reasons I explained earlier. They can rely too much on nuts, grains, and beans, which may be difficult on digestion if overconsumed. A lot of grains and beans, in order to get the most nutrition out of them, it's best if they're soaked, particularly beans. Nuts as well, they're more digestible if you soak them overnight. It helps to break down those phytates so that you can digest them better. And any kind of vegetarian or vegan diet for a child will need to be supplemented with some sort of concentrated source of plant-based protein. So whether that's a protein powder in a daily smoothie, or some kind of protein powder added to something else in their diet to make sure that they're getting adequate protein so that they can build their body tissue and grow. All right, so let's get to just easy ways to create variety for kids. I'm not menu planning. I'm not giving you recipes or anything like that. What I tried to do in this lecture is to just give you some of the fundamentals of why these things are important, and encourage you to seek out resources online that resonate with you and your family. And I'm hoping that you just read labels and look for really high quality food and organize your life in a way that doing these things becomes routine. Everything at first, when you're trying to incorporate something new or make healthier meals, it's going to require a bit of effort and a learning curve. But once you get past that, it becomes more routine. It doesn't mean that it's effortless. It just means that it doesn't require as much mental energy to put it all together. But you have to work to get to that point. And so it just takes some consistency. So these are just some basic recommendations to create some variety and to incorporate a lot of healthy foods in your diet. So I like doing a lot of soups and stews, chili, ramen. You can use these kinds of foods. They're one-pot meals. You can add a lot of vegetables. You can add a protein source. You can put healthy fats in there. So it's kind of one-stop shopping when it comes to creating meals. If you're doing these kinds of foods, they're pretty simple. And you can add a salad, and you know, you can have some brown rice or something that you serve the soup over, or the stew. You can do a variety of potatoes, sweet potatoes. So you can add a lot of variety and flavor by using these one-pot meals, especially for kids. They're easy to make. There's usually some leftovers for lunch the next day, so that's always good too. Pasta dishes. Kids like pasta. I mean, you can find pretty good gluten-free pasta these days. Spaghettis are a little bit difficult because they tend to stick together, but things like rotelli or penne pasta can be gluten-free, and they tend to cook up pretty well. You just want to make sure that you're adding some protein and some vegetables to any kind of pasta dish. Smoothies are great if you can get your kids to like smoothies early in life. They're a great vehicle for supplement delivery and really building in a lot of intense nutrition, because you can add coconut oil, you can add ground flax seeds, you can use frozen fruit, particularly berries and things, to give some great phytonutrients. You can add protein powder, whether it's like a whey protein or a hemp protein, and you can add some nut butters. You can also add MCT oil. You can add probiotics. You know, there's all kinds of things that you can add to smoothies and make them taste good. Finger foods with dips like veggies and hummus, fruit and nut butters. You can like use a lot of vegetables and puree them and make vegetable dips out of them. I make this great steamed cauliflower that I mash up and add some red onions and some dill and some mayonnaise to, and it's a great dip. Everybody loves this, and it's cauliflower. So you know, you could do something like that with a variety of vegetables that you could cook down and mash up and make it colorful and fun for the kids. Homemade granola, gluten-free oats. You can add all kinds of nuts and seeds. You can add chia seeds. You can add flax seeds. You can add coconut and dried fruit. If you want to put a few nice dark chocolate chips in there, it becomes like a sweet treat and a snack. So there's lots of ways of doing that. And granola can be very simple to make on the stovetop. Literally, it could be a 20-minute process. Chopped salads and slaws. You know, a lot of kids don't like raw vegetables or salads because sometimes they're just difficult to eat. So you can just put a salad together, and you can take a portion of it and throw it in your food processor and pulse it a few times so that it's more of a chopped salad. So it's not so difficult for the kids to eat. They can even pick it up with their fingers, or they can more easily get it onto their fork. And everything is kind of chopped and mixed together, so from a texture standpoint, it's more uniform. Also doing things like slaws, where you're grating a lot of vegetables down, where you're finely grating them and mixing them together. It might be more appealing for kids, and you can put a good dressing on there. You can put some crunchy things in there. So it gives it some variety and some difference in flavor. Again, going back to eggs, eggs are very versatile. You can make eggs like little muffin cups. You can make frittatas. You can make deviled eggs. You can include a lot of vegetables, like if you want to make an omelet, you can, or even scrambled eggs. You can do all kinds of things with eggs. It's a great source of protein if your kids are not allergic to them. Things like latkes, which are basically shredded vegetables combined with potatoes and meats, and combined with eggs, and then you just cook them on the stovetop in a pan, and it's kind of like a pancake. Or if you've ever had a latke, it's just basically shredded potatoes. But you can make them a lot more interesting, and you can pack a lot of nutrition by adding in shredded vegetables and some meats as well. One mention about like cookware, I don't advise using anything that is Teflon coated, because these things tend to outgas and adds toxins to our foods. So there's good pans that are nonstick that are ceramic. So getting yourself a good set of ceramic coated pans that you use for stovetop cooking is a great thing to have, because they tend to be nonstick, but they're also non-toxic. Sauces, you can add pureed vegetables to curries and spaghetti sauce. You can add in coconut milk to build it up and give yourself some healthy fats. So there's a lot of things that you can add to sauces. Having, you know, about 5 or 6 good sauces that your kids like, you can put it on everything and it encourages them to eat it if they like the sauce. Baked goods, use nut flours, use nuts and seeds, shredded or pureed veggies, and fruits and eggs. So there's really a lot of ways to make some healthy baked goods that can be packed with some good nutrition. And keep a variety of nuts on hand for kids to snack on. And again, if you soak them in water overnight, like almonds, for example, can be soaked overnight. Cashews, I wouldn't do walnuts because they're a soft nut already. But other nuts and seeds like pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds, if you soak them overnight, it actually brings out the flavor, and they taste better and they're not so dry. So soaking nuts overnight, you can soak them and then you can also put them in the oven and kind of roast them on a very low temperature so it dries out the moisture, but they've already been soaked or sprouted, and they're very, very tasty. All right, so transitioning to healthier options. So you want to find healthier alternatives to the foods that your kids already really like. So just make a list. What are the things that they're really attached to? Is it goldfish? Is it mac and cheese? You know, so first off, find some healthier versions of those. You can go to any health food store. It's not to say that I'm advocating these things because they're usually just a lot of filler carbs. But if this is going to be a slow, long process and your kids are going to pitch a fit to be without it, at least find a healthier version. Don't change everything all at once. You want to start with foods that everyone is enjoying during the family dinner. So get the kids to sit down with you and everybody gets to try new things together. And they'll feel more encouraged to try that food, excuse me, that they've never had before. Again, make extra dinner to have leftovers for lunch or breakfast the next day. We don't have to have typical breakfast food for breakfast. You know, you can eat whatever you want for breakfast. It could be leftovers from dinner the night before. It could be soup. It could be stew. You know, it doesn't have to be eggs and toast. Make a large salad to have extra for a few days. You can use this for dinner the night before and lunch the next day. You can add a source of protein. You can add some nuts and hard-boiled eggs. You can add some leftover quinoa. You can mix it all together, and it's a healthy salad for mom and dad. And it can be something, too, again, that if you pulse and put in a food processor and kind of make it like a slaw, the kids might like it, too. Try to incorporate protein-rich foods at breakfast. You know, think about toast toppers like eggs and avocados and nut butters that you can put fruit on top. So get creative with, you know, doing toast toppers because kids like those kinds of things. You can make little faces with them. You can use berries and apples and bananas and things and put some healthy nut butter on toast. And that's a great breakfast. And it's also a really good snack. Okay, so here's some resources for nutritional guidance. Those of you out there who have kids who are on the spectrum are probably familiar with Julie Matthews. She has a great book called Nourishing Hope for Autism, Nutritional Intervention for Healing Our Children, and you can find that at this web address. She also has a cooking course called Cooking to Heal, and she's got great resources. She is currently doing online programs and nutritional classes for parents and nutritionists alike. And so she has great information in this book. It's a really great resource, and she goes a lot into some of those chemical compounds in foods that kids might react to, like salicylates and phenols. And she gives you very specific guidance about what to do. And she's got great ideas for ways to get kids to eat healthier foods. Melina Roberts, ND, Building a Healthy Child, Food Introduction Guide for the First 4 Years of Life. I like this book because it talks about that transition from, weaning our babies off of breast milk into more solid foods, and the best way to make that transition and some of the best foods to do it. I also like that it's from a naturopathic doctor's perspective. And then this is an old book that's been around for a long time, but I think it's good overall general information from Dr. Leo Galland and Diane Buckman. Super Immunity for Kids, What to Feed Your Kids to Keep Them Healthy and Prevent Disease in Their Future. So these are some really great resources that if you want some more information or you need more specific guidance, I would refer to these. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about micronutrient needs for kids. It's hard to really get this all on a slide to talk about all of the micronutrient requirements for our kids. But if you're interested to know, you can go to Oregon State University and look for micronutrient requirements of children ages 4 to 13. And they have two tables broken out into the nutrient needs for 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 13-year-olds. So you can find these great resources online. Oregon State University has a great health sciences department, so they've got a lot of great research articles. And I found this table for nutrient requirements to be really helpful. So if you're concerned about your kids not getting enough nutrients and you just want to make sure that they're getting what they need by providing them with some daily supplements, here's what I would recommend. If you have kids that don't, parents are always worried about calcium deficiency if their kids can't eat dairy products, so there's a lot of good plant-based calcium sources out there, but still it's nice to have a backup and have maybe a calcium supplement. So these are just some general recommendations to cover the bases. And all of these products are from New Beginning Nutritionals, and they're very good at catering to parents of kids who are either on the spectrum or even neurotypical kids, because they've got great products that are just specific for kids. So a good multivitamin would be the Spectrum Make capsules or powders, and you can follow the dosage recommendations for the age of your child. They also have a mineral calcium supplement, the calcium chewable with magnesium, that's a chewable product obviously, and then there's the CalMag citrate capsules. So we always have to be aware that very young kids cannot swallow capsules or tablets very well. So our goal is to always look for either powdered or liquid products for them, or even capsules that we can open up and empty the powder out. Essential fats, you would dose these for age. There's the Ultra Omega 3, 1 to 2 capsules daily. So these are little capsules if your child can swallow. And then there's the Arctic cod liver oil strawberry flavor, and the dosage is typically 1 teaspoon. Vitamin D is important in growing kids and adults alike, so making sure our kids get enough vitamin D to support their immune system function. You can do the D3 plus K2 at 1 capsule per day, and this is 5,000 IUs of vitamin D with 180 micrograms of K2. It's important to have some K2 around because it does help with the absorption of vitamin D. If you can't do a capsule, there's also the micellized D3 drops, which are basically, they have no flavor, it just tastes like a little bit of vitamin E. And 1 drop is equal to 1,200 IUs of vitamin D. And then a good probiotic. So the ProBio 100, 1 capsule daily, that should cover your bases for good levels of lactobacilli and bifidobacter. Okay, so that's it for nutrition for kids and how to feed your kids healthy. Hopefully you can use some of the fundamentals that I presented here to make better food choices for your kids and come up with some ideas for great meals that you can feed your family. And remember that this is a process, not an event. Just stay at it so that it becomes part of your normal routine, and your kids will be better for it. I know that with my own kids, we, encourage them to always try new foods. We never ate kid foods, It's not to say that they didn't get those things, but you know, dinner time was a time to explore and try new things, and they have very broad tastes when it comes to food. There's most things they like and are willing to try foods. So it starts out when they're really young. So the sooner you start, the better. All right, so if you are interested in doing some testing and you don't have a practitioner who can order testing for you, Dr. Wohler and I do have a service called Lab Test Plus where you can order a variety of testing, and it comes with a written review and some basic recommendations. And you can access those through labtestsplus.com. There you go, labtestplus.com, and the email is labtestplus@gmail.com. Just to let you know, for any parents or practitioners out there who might be interested, Dr. Wohler is starting another Autism Mastery course. This one starts on January 23rd, so actually a week from today. There is still the early bird discount is available. There are continuing education credits available. There's a course exam. There's probably two, one halfway through and one midway, one at the end. And it allows you extended access to course material. So this is a very good course. Even for parents, it gets a little complex, but not out of reach for sure, and great for practitioners who are looking to include some autism evaluation and treatment in their practice. And if you are interested in a special report, you can text the word autism to 66866, and you will receive a special report on how to implement autism treatment in your practice. And again, that is the word autism to 66866. And if you're a practitioner out there who is looking to expand your knowledge base, or you need to work with another practitioner to help you with laboratory interpretation, troubleshooting difficult cases, particular recommendations, both Dr. Wohler and I are available through our mentoring program through our practice. And you can see our phone number is down there. You can also email our practice at scmedicalcenter@gmail.com. And that is me. If anybody out there is interested in consultation, I am available through the same email and phone number for in-person consults, phone or internet consults as well. So anyway, I hope you got some good information out of this presentation, and that it makes your life a little easier in trying to learn how to feed your kids healthier. Thanks for listening. Bye.